Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming in a new Diablo video. Today we're talking dungeons, Nightmare mode, Nightmare Dungeon. These fantastic modified dungeons provide incredible XP, amazing loot rewards in which I found multiple unique legendaries even in one night, and the all-important glyph XP that we all need. To say the least, these dungeons are absolutely core to the endgame, and understanding them will obviously really help with that. The truth is, not all dungeons are created equal, and damn, some of these with their affixes can be nightmarish, and you should avoid these at all costs. This video then is a quick cover of the Nightmare dungeons, how they work and what you need to know, with lots of tips and tricks to help make the experience smoother. With all that said though, let's begin. The first thing you need to know about Nightmare dungeons is how to unlock them. And so you're going to need to come here to the World Tier statue, or when you log in, and go into Nightmare mode or World Tier 3 or above for Fort and Torment. As you can see though, Nightmare Sigils can now drop the Unseal Nightmare dungeons at this level. A sigil can be found in your Consumables tab and look something like this. And as you can see, they have different tiers. For example, this is a tier 8, that's a tier 9, that's a tier 10, and they have different dungeon affixes, one being green and a couple being negative ones. By simply using this item, I can turn this dungeon into the Nightmare dungeon. And as you can see, it shows on my map now to show me where it is. And if I open up the map, it even instantly brings me to that location. I can casually pin that and zoom out and go, hey, there it is. And there's a waypoint, obviously, Margrave, quite close to it. So that is my specific dungeon to go do. To get your first sigil to actually get a Nightmare dungeon going, then you're going to need to go to the Tree of Whisperers. As you can see, we can see a bar of Grim Favors, 0 out of 10. And we must fill this to 10 out of 10 to complete the tree for its repeatable quests. This is shown on the map by these Grim Favor symbols over dungeons and over specific side quests that you can do in the open world. And as you can see, they appear all over the place in different regions at different times and all give different rewards. We have a full guide on the Tree of Whisperers if you want more information about that, but ultimately just do one tree by filling it to 10 out of 10 and collecting your first reward. At that point, you'll be given your first sigil and you can do your first Nightmare dungeon. By going to the dungeon and completing it, throughout you'll be actually getting more sigils, and you will level up your sigil from, say, tier 1 to tier 2. Complete this until you've completed a tier 4 or higher Nightmare dungeon, and this will unlock sigil crafting, where the system kind of really opens up. In any major town, you will have an Occultist, which we should be pretty familiar with extracting and imprinting aspects. At the Occultist, after you've done that tier 4 dungeon, he will give you a quick quest to actually craft your first sigil. Crafting sigils comes down to currently Sacred or Ancestral and all these different tiers, as you can see. Sacred is basically Nightmare mode, where Ancestral is Torment mode or World Tier 4. The higher tiers you go, the more sigil powder you're actually going to need to craft these. But it's very easy to craft them. I could just pick, say, tier 11 to 15 here, and it'll cost me 11 of these sigil powders. So let's craft that, and there it is in my consumable list, a tier 14 Nightmare dungeon. To get the materials needed to craft these, you will just need to do Nightmare dungeons in general, but you can also salvage, much like a blacksmith, the very same sigils we're talking about. By salvaging it, I get some of those very materials that we need to craft them. And it really is as simple as that. But let's talk about Nightmare dungeons and the details of that. For one, there is no time limit, but you do have limited revives. This means you can take as long as you want clearing these dungeons, whatever is necessary, whatever's safe and functional to you, or go as quick as you can. Just be aware that if you die, you have a limited number of revives. In Nightmare dungeons of tiers 1 to 20, you will have 12 revives, so 12 resets if you do die to continue on without losing progress. If you were to lose all 12 lives, that would be it. They'd kick you out of the dungeon, that's it. As we go into World Tier 4 and the Torment mode, and basically tier 21 and above, you only have 4 revives, so the consequences of dying are obviously a lot more dire. You can take it at your own pace. There's no reason to rush other than time efficiency for XP and the rewards that you're working on. But if you're in a really tough Nightmare dungeon, there's nothing wrong with going slow and making sure you don't fail it. Something you need to understand though is these tiers and what they actually mean, because there is a difference between them. Specifically, it'll throw different levels of enemies at you based on what tier you're in. Let me give you an example. All the way at the end, at a tier 100 dungeon, you'll be facing enemies level 153, which helps keep this simple. It means whatever tier you're in, it's adding 53 levels to that. So at a tier 1 Nightmare dungeon, you should be fighting roughly level 54 enemies. There's a really nice XP breakpoint where if you're 3 or more levels below the enemies you're fighting, you get the maximum 20% 25% XP increase. So if you're farming Nightmare Dungeons for XP, you want the enemies to be at no more than 3 levels higher than you currently are. Therefore, as I'm level 58, I'd want to be facing level 61, level 62 enemies. Now we know the actual levels of the tiers and what to expect in them, we should talk about these affixes, which again, you can see there's different amounts of affixes on each of these. To start with, you'll have one positive affix shown in green, such as Quick Killer here. Killing a monster grants 1.5% attack and move speed, stacking up to 15%. That sounds nice. But I'll be dealing with empowered elites who are poison enchanted and monsters with additional shadow damage. This is a great one because neither of those things really matter. We can pretty much entirely ignore them. But not all are created equal. For example, this one I've saved for the video has one of those nightmare affixes I refuse to deal with. Empowered Elites Suppressor. That is an incredibly irritating perk for an enemy to have. It creates that ring around them that you have to be in. And if you're playing a build that doesn't go mano a mano melee mode, it's a problem. And it's certainly a problem for us Necromancers who don't really have the survivability of other classes. I don't have a mage shield or anything like that. There's some insane positive affixes like fire damage if you are using that. Calling down lightning that AoEs enemies for you. Reduced cooldowns on kill is insane. I will absolutely fly through that. It's a fantastic positive affix. But some of the really horrible negative ones that you really should avoid are things like, say, monster range attacks, burning your primary resource. That's absolutely nightmarish. Or when monsters are unstoppable at low life. Not only is that a problem because you can't CC them in any way, but actually all the conditional effects that we benefit from, like me stunning or slowing or CCing anyway, massively improving my crit, I just won't have that. And then also the monster just berates us. There's nothing we can do. So I would say suppressors, burning primary resource, and unstoppable at low life. Those are the worst negative affixes in the entire game right now. And if you have one of those negative affixes, you should probably avoid that sigil entirely. There are examples of modifiers that are a problem, but manageable, like when they gain a barrier. This means you can't actually apply debuffs or CC until the barrier is removed. In my case, I deal a lot of vulnerable effect, and many builds do. And there is a negative affix where the monsters resist the vulnerable effect entirely, which would be a real problem in my case. My build is all around critical strike damage, and there's a way for monsters to actually take less crit damage. That's also a problem. So just taking a look at the negative affixes and going, oh yeah, that's not going to be a problem for me, or no, yeah, that completely screws my build, and picking and choosing which you're actually going to do. Because ultimately, if you get one like this that you know is going to be terrible, you can just dismantle it and then try again. In terms of how many negative affixes you'll be dealing with depends on the tier level of the sigil. As you can see, this tier 14 has 3 negative affixes, and it'll go up to a cap of 4 negative affixes as you go into tier 20 and beyond. Moving on, let's talk about glyphs and the XP you get from them. Glyphs are so powerful, so impactful on your build. Take my territorial glyph here. I'm dealing 23.5% more damage to close enemies, which is amazing, but also 10% damage reduction against close enemies as well. This is a really powerful survivability detail, and that's only activating when I meet the requirements of this glyph, which is 25 dexterity purchased within this red radius range. When you upgrade glyphs, it not only enhances those positive numbers, those positive effects, but it will also, at level 15 and beyond, extend the red radius range of this, meaning I can reach more nodes and potentially actually activate that secondary effect with different glyphs. So leveling them up is really beneficial for the secondary requirement, but also just increasing the power of the glyph is major too. Every time you finish a Nightmare Dungeon, you get some XP to put towards a glyph. And the higher tier the Nightmare Dungeon, the more glyph XP you get at the end. So if you're looking to level your glyphs as fast as possible, you should be pushing your Nightmare Dungeon tiers as high as you can to still clear. There's a breakpoint, of course, where, you know, you're going so slowly because the tier you're dealing with is such a problem that it's maybe not worth the time to XP ratio, and that's something for you to work out. But you should absolutely be pushing to find that point where you're like, okay, this is a bit too much now. Let's now pull it back like 3 tiers and then clear at that point to maximize my glyph XP. It really comes down to, are you doing the Nightmare Dungeon to give yourself personal XP for Paragon points, or are you trying to level your glyphs? In my opinion, you're here to level your glyphs because that's what this mode is all about. That's the main reward at the end. You can farm XP in other ways. World events, the Tree of Whisperers, and there are specific dungeons that are fantastic XP farming methods that are just going to give you more XP than just farming Nightmare Dungeons. In my opinion then, you should be pushing your glyph level and the tiers as far as you can to increase your rewards and increase your glyph XP. You'll still get good personal XP anyway, but that should be your priority glyph XP in my opinion. But yeah, that's my overview of Nightmare Dungeons and the details that I think you should know and any extra tips and helpful things that I can provide to you. The thing is, the higher you go in these tiers, the harder it's going to become to survive. That's where you're going to need to really start to think about the specific stats and details of your equipment. Dropping stats that give you extra damage or minor benefits to add skills that have damage reduction from close and far enemies, or damage reduction while you're CC'd as well. That can be life-saving. There comes a point where you need to start using elixirs to resist the specific type of enemy you're dealing with and giving yourself as many defensive and survival options as possible. You can be as patient as slow as you want in those Nightmare Dungeons, and yeah, going slowly and carefully while slower for XP and all that does let you reach higher tiers and ultimately get more glyph XP. Being able to play around what enemies they're throwing at you and the types that you're dealing with in terms of those affixes, that's where the skill's going to come in. And honestly, it's where a lot of the fun is, overcoming those challenges and getting good at dealing with certain types of enemies on the fly very quickly. That has been my overview of Nightmare Dungeons. If you guys have any further information or tips that could help someone understand or, do them better, then drop that in the comments. You might just help someone, but I do hope this helped you. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.